Hi, everyone. Chris here from National Parents Organization. And today I have Dr. Daniel Fernandez Kranz. He's out of Madrid, Spain, and he is the winner of the Ned Holstein Research Award this year. And he did research along with Dr. Natalia Nollenberger Castro. And we wanted to talk with him today a little bit about his research and about winning that Shared Parenting Award. With that, Dr. Kranz, thanks you for joining us today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And so, Dr. Krantz, tell us, a little bit about your background. How did you get into researching families and shared parenting?
Sure. So, as you said, my name is Daniel Fernandez Kranz, and for my background, I'm an associate professor of economics and vice dean for economics at IE University in Madrid, Spain. Many of the listeners probably don't know IE University. It's a new, very international and dynamic university in Madrid. So I invite listeners to visit to learn more about it. But anyways, I'm an economist. I did my PhD in economics at the University of Chicago, and I got interested in doing research in applied microeconomic topics, and more precisely, I've been doing research in topics such as understanding the causes and the consequences of gender differences in the labor market, and how family formation and the dissolution of families also affects labor market decisions, but also the well-being of household members, including children. So I'm doing research in what we call in economics the areas of gender economics and family economics.
Well, that's fantastic. And how long have you been doing this research?
So I've been doing this research pretty much since I finished my PhD. I first worked a few years in economic consulting, but after that, and then when I rejoined academia in 2005, then I started to do this research. So it's almost 20 years, right?
Yeah, that's a long time doing research. And what sort of topics have you done in the past? What range of topics have you covered?
Right. So apart from the analysis of divorce law, that I'm going to talk a bit more later if you want, in the past, I've been mainly interested in what we call, as I said before, gender economics. And that is understanding the causes and the consequences of the differences in earnings and other labor market outcomes between men and women. And I study these issues from various perspectives. For example, how children and motherhood affect this gender gap in employment and wages, which we call the child penalty. Also, how work and family balance policies affect these gender gaps, or the effect of dual labor markets on these gender differences between men and women. By dual labor markets, I mean a characteristic of Spain and other European countries' labor markets, in which more or less two-thirds of employees are employed in stable and what we call permanent contracts, whereas one-third of employees, mainly young people and also women, tend to churn across very unstable temporary labor contracts. So in general, I've been doing research mainly in the areas of family economics and gender economics and implications for labor market outcomes and other welfare indicators.
Fantastic. And what got you interested in doing, gender economics research in the first place?
Well, this was a topic that was so one of my advisors in the University of Chicago, Kevin Murphy, was doing. It was very well known in doing research on wage differences and wage inequality across different groups in the United States, across racial groups, but across gender groups as well. One of my other advisors, Robert Topel, was doing research in similar areas. So I got interested in these type of topics from when I was doing my PhD at the University of Chicago. And I also liked to work with data. And that was a very interesting area to do research on, that at that time was a hot topic, still is nowadays, and in which, applied research and playing with data, it's kind of the natural way to do research in this area. And it's also an area in which, you find very important, it's a crossroad between very important topics. So on the one hand, there is wage inequality, income inequality. On the other hand, it's how family formation, how family dissolution, the tenants of children, etc., and different types of laws interact between these and the labor markets to determine things such as the level of inequality, etc., etc. So I think this is a quite interesting area of research overall.
Well, fantastic. And I want to bring up now the web page here for the National Parents Organization, just to introduce the NPO Ned Holstein Shared Parenting Research Award and talk a little bit about it because you were the recipient this year of it, along with Dr. Natalia Castro. And so tell us a little bit, what was the research that won this award this year, and how did you get started with that research, and what did you find out?
Well, that research, the shared parenting, or the research on shared parenting, we started doing research on this topic about 5 years ago. We have a total of 3 papers actually on this topic, and this is one of the areas within this broader area of inequality, gender economics, welfare economics, etc., in which you find these very important, sometimes controversial social issues, which I think make research very interesting. And this is definitely the case for the analysis of shared parenting. And what we got interested in shared parenting, I think it was a combination of 2 factors. On the one hand, some Spanish regions at that time in the early 2000s, 2005, 6, 7, etc., had just passed some legal reforms in favor of joint custody that were quite ambitious, and that meant a quite radical break with respect to the previous regime, in which the vast majority of cases, the custody of children after divorce was granted exclusively to the mother, without the father having the possibility to appeal this decision. So the reforms of these regions were based on the principle that the interest of the minor was preserved by granting custody of the children jointly to both parents, as long as there was no significant evidence against these decisions, such as, for example, clear evidence that one of the parents had neglected the child during marriage, or cases of gender violence, right? So before these reforms, I would say in Spain there was a sense of injustice, but also some controversy and anxiety about the consequences of these reforms on the welfare of children. So at that time, this was a very interesting and hot area of research. So on the other hand, child custody law in general was, and I think still is, understudied in the field of family economics. So with only a few studies that, in the field of economics at least, had focused on the joint legal custody reforms that were passed in the United States during the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. But those laws put the emphasis more on the joint legal custody of children, and not necessarily on the joint physical custody, or the time the children spend with each of the parents, which was one of the central elements of the Spanish reform. So the Spanish reforms made it very clear that when joint custody was awarded to children, would spend, to divorced parents, children would spend more or less 50% of the time physically with each of the parents. So the Spanish case offered a nice, what we call natural experiment, where to study the effects of shared parenting due to legal reforms, maybe for the first time.
Well, that's a really good A to B test case. And what did the research show?
So in these research, as I was saying before, right, we investigate the effect of these reforms. So what we do is, in the first part, we look at the effect of these reforms on divorce. And if you think about it from a purely theoretical point of view, the effect is kind of ambiguous. Assuming that both parents enjoy and want to have the custody of children, what these laws do, to put it simply, is to increase the cost of divorce for the mother, but decrease the cost of divorce for the father. So you have kind of these opposed effects on the probability of divorce coming from both sides. So a priori, you wouldn't expect to find a very strong effect on the probability of divorce. And in fact, this is what we find in the first part of our analysis, right? So we statistically investigate the effect of these reforms on the probability of divorce, and we don't find any significant effect. What we do find is that these laws decrease the percentage of contentious divorces and wife-initiated divorces. And we interpret this in the context of the theories of bargaining power within marriage. More precisely, these shared parenting laws decreasing the relative power of the mother in a process of separation or divorce, which we find consistent with these theories, right? So the first part of the analysis is kind of a validation test, and that's a very frequent practice in this type of research, in which first you try to see whether your data tells you what you would expect to find in a particular set of outcomes, right? So once you find that, then you move to the second part, and the results of this second part maybe are a bit more credible because you pass this validation test. So in the second part, what we study is the effect of these laws on the welfare of children, of divorced parents. And we use a different data set, which is a survey on about 180,000 teenagers in Spain about their habits during leisure time, and also related to the consumption of alcohol, drugs, etc. But also some questions about the relationship between these teenagers and their parents. And what we find is that these shared parenting laws decrease the risky behavior of teenagers, and also improve the relationship between these teenagers and the father, especially in the case of boys. So in general, what we find is quite positive effects of these laws on the welfare of teenagers measured by these indicators.
Yeah, and that data is very consistent with other studies that I've seen, here in the United States. I want to go back to your first point about the rate of who initiates the divorce, and I find that curious because I found other data that shows that when couples are not married, they who initiates the separation is roughly 50-50, but when they're married, it's usually around 70% of the time that the woman would initiate a divorce. So it's interesting to show that the data sort of levels that out a little bit. I think that's a really, really interesting point here.
Right, and this is consistent with what you would expect from theory, right? In these theories of bargaining power within marriage, in which these laws kind of balance that out a bit better than before the reforms, right? And so and these changes in the probability of wife-initiated divorces, the reduction of it, actually it's consistent with that, yes.
And I think it's also interesting the data around teenager risky behavior and vital statistics with teenagers. That's also consistent with other studies that I've seen, and it's really interesting to see how the economics of this sort of plays into the behavior. To me, that's one of the really fascinating things that about economics is that I think we often forget that it does drive behavior, and these policies do influence how people act ultimately.
Right. So, in a sense, what we're doing in this research is not very different from what research in other fields in psychology, for example, have attempted. Right. But we use maybe slightly different methodologies. And so, in economics, and this is about some of the challenges in the data and how to study this issue. Right. So, one of the challenges is that when you approach this research, right, one of the questions that comes out is that people that request joint custody, or when joint custody is granted to a set of parents and their children, maybe these parents and these children are not necessarily representative of the overall population. So maybe the effects that you find for this particular group of individuals is not representative of the entire population, right? And so we try to overcome these issues by studying or setting up what we call a natural experiment. And this has to do with sort of the identification strategies that we follow in economics in some of the policy evaluation literature. So the way we do it here is, in this case, as in many other cases in which you study a given policy, what you find is that for a variety of reasons, that law or that public policy that you are evaluating has not been implemented homogeneously across groups in society, or time periods, or regions, or a combination of all these. And that gives you kind of an interesting variation across these different geographies, time periods, or groups in the population that you could exploit to then try to find more causal effects of these laws on the welfare of these individuals. And that's what we do exactly in this paper, right? So these reforms were passed in some Spanish regions, but not in others. And in the paper, we show that there's no clear reason as to why these reforms should have been passed in those regions, but not in the others. So it's kind of random or exogenous to some extent. And these reforms were passed in different years across these different regions. So we exploit this regional difference as well as the time difference to get into these more causal effects of the law. So what we find is that teenagers in those regions that passed the laws during the years where after the laws were passed experience these decreases in risky behavior compared to similar teenagers in regions that did not pass the laws during the years, either without reforms or before the reform. So this is kind of the strategy that empirically we use in this paper to assess these effects.
Well, that's fantastic. You usually don't, when you're doing social research, it's really hard to find good comparison cases, and it seems like you've certainly found about as best a comparison case as you can. with this. I wanted to ask, did your research get into the the economic resources that are available to the children? Sort of both before shared parenting and after shared parenting. Financially, are the children better off with shared parenting?
In this paper, we don't study this question. For example, child support. I know there is some literature actually that studies this and that finds that, if I recall correctly, that the amount of child support tends to increase when joint custody gets awarded, so that the father feels more attached to that child, and that increases the probability of fulfilling the mandate of a given amount of child support. I think that's one of the results of the previous literature. We have a different paper in which we actually study the opposite, the effect of changes in the child support amount because of joint custody on the welfare of children, and that's another published paper that we have in this topic with different results than the ones that I'm discussing here.
So in the research that you've been doing here, in the research that you've been doing, were there any surprises that you came across in the data?
Well, I would say that when we started this research, maybe one of the surprises that we saw in the data, and that's more on the descriptive level, is how important, how impactful these reforms were on the incidence of joint custody, right? So just to give you an idea, for these Spanish regions that passed the reforms, before the reforms, the incidence of joint custody was less than 9% of all divorces. After the reforms, in just 5 years, that incidence had increased to 40% or more. So this huge change in the incidence of joint custody, to us, it means that there was a huge unsatisfied social demand for this type of custody that these little changes make possible, and was not possible otherwise without these reforms. That probably was one of the first surprises that we encountered in the data, and that made us also aware of the relevance probably of this topic.
And is there any research topics that you plan on going into in the future with regard to shared parenting or gender equality?
Well, with regard to shared parenting, as I was mentioning before, I have another couple of papers. One of them is already published, and that paper, as I was saying before, studies a different area with not so positive, I have to say, not so positive effects on one of the elements of shared parenting on the welfare of children. What we do in that paper is we study one of the elements of shared parenting in the United States. So that paper focuses on the United States, and if you look at the way that child support is determined in the United States, each state has a different set of either sometimes it's guidelines, sometimes it's a specific equation to calculate this child support. Now, it happens that in some states, under a joint custody regime, the amount of child support decreases almost to zero. Whereas in other states, the child support under joint custody, it's pretty much the same as if custody was awarded solely to the mother. And then you have a bunch of states that lie in between these two extremes. So in a sense, what you have in the United States is a different magnitude or set of what we call economic incentives for joint custody, because in some states, once a parent gets awarded joint custody, the child support gets significantly reduced, whether in other states that doesn't happen, right? So what we do is we study the effect of these economic incentives, we call it this way, to joint custody on the welfare of children. And we find negative effects on different outcomes, from education to health, etc. And so one of the interpretations of this research, of this result, is that whereas shared parenting and joint custody laws reforms, I think in general are positive and are needed. It's a needed change, and it's a positive change. We have to be careful also as to how we design these policies in order to make sure that we prevent some of the unwanted effects, maybe because in some cases these economic incentives are just too large, that might lead to some unwanted consequences. Maybe some parents requested joint custody just because of the economic savings rather than a true interest in the welfare of children. So that's one paper. In another paper that now is under review in a top field journal in economics, we now go back to Spain, to the Spanish setup of reforms, setting of reforms, and what we analyze there is the effect of these reforms on intimate partner violence. And what we find is that the passing of these laws reduces significantly the extent of intimate partner violence. And we interpret these results in the context of the male backlash theories of intimate partner violence, in which sometimes this intimate partner violence happens when the man feels his position threatened for a variety of reasons in different contexts. So this is the other research paper that I have on this topic.
That's fantastic. And I'd like to add that I think one issue that we see here in the United States is that when there's a significant financial benefit to having more time with the children, we often see that increases the amount of conflict, particularly in the divorce cases, which I think leads to intimate partner violence in some cases. So it is interesting again how these policies do drive behavior, and I think when you have legislators that are considering reforms to laws, they need to really analyze and consider how the existing laws are potentially negatively benefiting the population.
Right, exactly. But as I was saying before, in our research, what we find actually it's kind of the opposite, right? In the sense that these shared parenting laws reduce at least one of the reasons or one of the models for this intimate partner violence, which has to do with this male backlash, type of situations, and that has to to be put in context with these other type of situations in which, as you said, sometimes that creates conflicts between two parents of getting into an agreement about different types of decisions that affect the welfare of children.
Yeah, we've certainly seen it when there's a lot of child support at stake. It'll cause one party to fight probably more than they would otherwise if that money wasn't at stake.
Exactly.
I wanted to ask you, what do you hope that the future holds for shared parenting across the world? Is this a good thing? Is this something that you hope becomes rather universal?
Well, I have to say that from a researcher point of view, we usually have a hard time answering this type of questions because we tend to take kind of an agnostic view as to whether one policy is good or not. We prefer to do research, see what the research outcomes are, and then make a statement based on that. So, but I would say that based on the evidence that I've seen so far, now I think that this shared parenting and joint custody regulations or laws in general are good for society and for children in particular. So I hope that in the future these regulations and these laws, these reforms continue to happen. But I also think, and related to maybe the results of the other study that I was mentioning, I hope that when these reforms get passed and designed, that the care is put in preventing this, the potential of some of the unwanted consequences, because some of the elements of these laws are not, particularly well thought or fine-tuned. So this is important. I think this is important to take into account as well. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. At least, my experiences here in the United States, we've seen shared parenting implemented differently across different states, and now that we have a number of states that have passed shared parenting laws and are practicing it, we're certainly seeing slightly different outcomes based on the wording in the laws and how the judges are applying it and those sorts of things. So, yeah, it's very, very good to be careful and make sure that you use best practices when implementing these things.
Exactly, and I think that works in the favor of these same reforms, right? So when you do these reforms in the right way, that also raises support in society for these type of reforms, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's an important thing to take into account.
Well, fantastic. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Is there any other topics that you want to cover before we let everybody go?
No, that's all from my part as well. And thank you very much for the invitation. It's been my pleasure.
Oh, you're very welcome. And where can people contact you if they want to? Where can they read your research?
So if people are interested in my research, they can find it in the usual outlets. I have, a homepage or a Google Scholar page as well, or my, university faculty member page. But also, they feel free to email me at daniel.fernandez@iu.edu. That's probably the easiest way to find me and contact me.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, and we look forward to seeing your research in the future.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.